you should always bear in mind that when we think about Lacan et cogito, it's not enough to recite those boring old poems, you know, of yeah, Lacan said against Descartes, I am not where I think. This can still be read in a purely anti-philosophical way. It simply means the truth of my being, the true lively productivity is not where I think. Then Lacan turns it around and says, I think where I am not. This is more interesting, where the unconscious is not the fullness of my being outside my thought, but it's a pure thinking outside myself, not where I feel myself existentially as the one I am. Then there are other formulations, but as Balmes points out very nicely, what Lacan does in his seminar, I think on Logique du fantasme, logic of fantasy, is to return to the identity of cogito and being, but as an empty set. For the last Lacan, cogito, in cogito, being and thinking do coincide, but in a negative way. In cogito, I'm pure thinking, but which is just a form of thinking, without any content. At the same time, I'm pure being, but deprived of any content. It's just as if the two empty points overlap here. And again, as such, this cogito should be asserted as universal, non-historical. Non-historical. Historicity is, I think, not the ultimate horizon. Which is why, as I try to develop in one of my texts, I think that one can, in a very nice way, refer here to Walter Benjamin. You know, when he talks about these two types of violence, staatsbildend and staatszerstörend. Violence which creates state, and violence which, this divine violence. And I think that Heidegger's problem is that when he does talk about violence and language, his notion of language as poets who grounds a polis, a nation, is still staatsbildend. I would like, in parallel to the relation of violence and state, to assert also not violence immanent in this imposing a certain disclosure of being, what poets do for a nation, but sprachzerstörend violence. Violence of torturing language breaking through to universality. So here, I think that maybe partially things, I haven't yet thought them to the end. Things are here very ambiguous for me, but I would have said nonetheless that here maybe Lacan's anti-philosophy can nonetheless be maybe reinterpreted as precisely, because, you know, when Lacan says anti-philosophy, one should always ask the obvious question, what is philosophy for him? And the quote that I read you is very ambiguous here. Lacan qualifies philosophy, to which he opposes, as wretched aborted freaks of philosophy, which we drag behind us from the beginning of the 19th century. That is to say, basically anti-philosophy. He designated philosophy this post-Hegelian philosophy. So again, what I would have said is that one should never forget that for Lacan, philosophy is rather this hermeneutic harmony between being and thinking, which is historically specified and so on and so on. I think that through the link of cogito and knowledge and so on, one can maybe construct an out reading Lacan against Lacan, of totally crazy, like we want to do, a kind of a return to pure cogito, matem, knowledge, and so on, outside this historicist hermeneutic, universal. But one crucial problem here. What about jouissance as nameless and so on? Doesn't Lacan nonetheless support, sustain his critique of philosophy in this disturbing element of excess of jouissance? Many things can be said here. I think one can even answer here in a very nice way Quentin Meillassoux, when he insisted on that problem of fossil as that third element which breaks this transcendental correlation. I think that for Lacan, you don't have to go outside. The true fossil is object small a. It's here in me, not Lacan. For Lacan, Meillassoux would have been way too Leninist in the bad sense of materialism and empiriocriticism. Meillassoux, for me, remains all too stuck in this typical naive pre-Hegelian problematic of we are caught in our representations. Can we reach out of them to reality in itself or not? For me as a Hegelian, this is a pseudo problem. The problem is not can we reach the in itself. The problem is Badiou's problem. How can in this stupid real something like thought emerge? The true problem is not can we go beyond our appearances to the real in itself. The problem is the one approached by Badiou in his Logics of the World. How can in the flat stupidity of the real something like the word emerge? Hegel knew this very clearly. The problem is not break out of appearance. The problem is how is appearance possible? Okay, but to go on, so jouissance. Here, I wonder if you would accept something. In one of your texts, you were totally right to characterize Lacan's reference to jouissance féminine as a reference to some kind of a cultural unsayable. But I don't think it is necessary to read it in that way, although I admit it, this is a predominant way. You know, in Lacan's formula of sexuation, when Lacan, how does Lacan describe this feminine position of jouissance? Usually this is read as something in woman resist symbolic order. Not all of woman is caught into the symbolic order. But I think if we read this in the sense of there is something in woman, this excess of mystical, in rapture, jouissance, which resists the symbolic, maybe we don't read Lacan correctly. Maybe we should nonetheless emphasize how the non-all of feminine jouissance also means that there is no exception. We should also say, there is nothing in woman which is outside the symbolic order or whatever. So I think that instead of reading jouissance féminine as kind of a mystical in rapture and so on, we should, so that, to put it bluntly in an almost sexist way, we men are purely within the symbolic order, women are with one leg in, with another part of them it resists with some kind of rapture. I think women are paradoxically more fully in the symbolic order. This is why they are non-all. They don't have any... Oh, in this sense, I think that here is how I would try to save Lacanian jouissance and the real for philosophy. And you already indicate that path. I think that what I don't like is this anti-philosophical notion of jouissance as some terrifying excess, too strong for symbolization. But I am tempted to read Lacan's famous formula, which you also quote on, that the real is only accessible through the deadlock, l'impasse of the symbolization, in a very strong literal way. The real is not some in itself, and Lacan formally opposes the idea that the real is any kind of Kantian in itself. which then we can only partially grasp. No, I think that the real literally is nothing but the deadlock of symbolization. A totally immanent real, a real which is just, yes, I stop, cuts of symbolism, and so on and so on. So from here, I would just like to mark maybe one or two, this is a question to you, how you would react differences. One big difference, I'm even not sure about it myself, we have this debate for 15 years, I think, is that in your logics of the worlds, I will just state the position. You seem to imply that what you call world, I think, I know I violently disagree with you and you with me here. I think there is no world without language, to cut a long story short. And I think that the very categories you use, like the crucial category of the point is a signifying category. I agree with you, with language is not, here I'm also a Platonist, not a limit. But I claim that, again, the category of world is thinkable only within the human universe of language. While you, if I got you correctly, for you, there are worlds already in, to put it in very naive terms, in reality outside man. Once you even spoke of, ironically, I know, of your dialectic of nature. Second point, you are usually reproached with a very stupid criticism that you are secretly an idealist in the sense of human animal, but then out of nowhere, event, grace, blah, blah. And then the idea is we should nonetheless develop out of concrete history how the event can emerge. I'm tempted to say the opposite, that my critique, open question to you, would have been the opposite one. What I problematize is not event, but human animal. I don't think there is something like human animal. I think that, of course there is empirically, but okay, to cut a long story short, I just will, and then I will finish, designate my position now. I claim that what you call animal life, this pursuit of servicing the good, service the bien, and so on, this normal animal utilitarian existence, and the truth event, that this polarity, duality, doesn't cover the entire field. There is something which I am tempted to call, with terms like anxiety, death drive, and so on, which is neither the one nor the other. And I think that with humans, what you call animal life, this ordinary existence, utilitarian and so on, servicing the goods, always comes secondary in the sense of its attempt to stabilize some traumatic anxiety, which is also a condition for truth event. You need anxiety, displacement, and so on in order to open up the space for the truth. And I think, that's my final point, that this maybe can be read in a not anti-philosophical way. My whole wager is that all this topic of death drive and so on should be totally de-imaginarized. It's what was called in philosophy, in German idealism, self-relating negativity, and so on. So again, I totally accept your tension between truth, the domain of truth procedures, and human animal. I just think that we need a third domain, death drive, anxiety, and so on, which then allows us to properly locate these two. But I know I didn't prove anything here. But you see my desperate wager, totally agreeing with your anti-philosophy. What I'm trying to